Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. Canadian businesses are looking anxiously to what a Donald Trump presidency and his promise of increased tariffs on imported goods could mean for their bottom line. BC's lumber industry already has a sense of the impact: lost jobs, devastated towns, and an uncertain future. So how do we protect our biggest export? And get your questions ready. Gardening expert Brian Minter will be here in our second half. I'm Amy Bell in for Michelle Elliott, and this is BC Today. And happy Friday. Thank you for joining us here on radio, TV, and live stream. You can call us now on our top story. How worried are you about the potential impact of Trump's tariffs on BC's economy? And how can we protect BC's lumber industry? Our number is 604-669-3733. You can also call 1-800-825-5950 or hit pound 690. You can also email us anytime, bctoday@cbc.ca. Colorful BC businesswoman Faye Leung, also known as the Hat Lady, has passed away at the age of 92. She was a realtor and a prominent member of both the Victoria and Vancouver Chinatown communities. She first came to people's attention while playing a role in bringing down then BC Premier Bill Vander Zalm over the sale of Fantasy Gardens. Here's Globe and Mail reporter Gary Mason paying tribute to Leung on the early edition this morning.
She was ultimately a very iconic figure in BC politics. She brokered the deal that in terms of the sale of Fantasy Gardens. She, I guess, brought Taiwanese billionaire Tan Yu together with Bill Vander Zalm, and that led to the sale of Fantasy Gardens, and ultimately led to the controversy that engulfed Vander Zalm and ultimately brought him down. He was charged with breach of trust and went to a criminal trial. He was ultimately acquitted, but that was sort of the end of Bill Vander Zalm. And if you continue down that line, it was ultimately the end of the Social Credit Party, and she played a role in that. But she was just this. She was obviously, as you say, a very colorful figure, iconic figure. But what I remember most about her is that she was actually a very lovable person. And she always had a smile. She always talked very quickly. She was always pressing this claim to reporters that, Vander Zalm owed her, $1.6 million or something like this. I don't think she ever got that money or any of it. But anyway, she was just a very delightful person, and it didn't matter what political event you seemed to be at or what party or anything like that. She would surface, and she would be surrounded by reporters or seek out reporters, and I don't know. She was just one of these colorful figures in the pantheon of colorful figures that have played a role in BC politics over the years, and BC has been sort of come known for these kind of figures.
That was a Globe and Mail reporter, Gary Mason. He was paying tribute to Vancouver trailblazer and businesswoman Faye Leung, who has passed away at the age of 92. BC businesses are bracing themselves for the potential of trade disruptions that U.S. President-elect Donald Trump, now that President-elect Donald Trump has won. On the campaign trail, Trump declared his intention to impose a minimum 10% fee on all imported products, and that will pose a challenge for all industries, but especially for BC's lumber industry when he takes office in January 2025. So we want to hear from you. How worried are you about the impact of Trump tariffs on BC's economy? And how can we protect BC's lumber industry? And if you're in the industry, how would this impact you directly? Call us at 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, pound 690 on your cell phone, and you can email bctoday@cbc.ca. Joining us now for more on this is Laura Jones, President and CEO of the Business Council of British Columbia. Hi, Laura. Thanks for taking time with us.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
So let's start off with where Canada and the US are at in the softwood lumber dispute. This began years ago when the 2006 lumber agreement expired in 2015. So, where do we stand right now?
Oh gosh, that dispute has been such a long-standing mess. It goes back to the 80s, and then there have been different agreements and different configurations.
Right.
And looking at it again, it's been very problematic for Canada for decades. And now on top of that, we're looking at a Trump presidency, and he said that tariffs are his favorite word in the dictionary.
Hmm.
So of course, that's a concern not just for our lumber industry, but for other industries as well, and really is broadly a concern for Canada because we already have a weak economy going into this, and additional tariffs from the U.S. on any of our products would be extremely problematic.
Um, one of the ways the BC industry has been coping, I suppose, has been to open up mills across the line in the US. But with mills closing in Canada, how is that impacting the job situation? I'm assuming these people working at the BC mills that have closed are not then going across the line to work at these US businesses.
Yeah, I mean, the forest industry is a shadow of its former self, still one of our biggest exports,
Hmm.
still a very important industry for British Columbia. But really, it has huge impacts because we lose the jobs, we lose the investment, it affects the communities. And, we tend to think of these things in a kind of a siloed way where we're thinking, oh, well, that affects forestry jobs.
Right.
But these are some of the higher paid jobs in the province in our natural resource sector. And when we lose those jobs, we lose opportunities for our kids to go into those industries. When those jobs don't exist, the restaurant business is
Hmm.
affected because there are fewer people going in for meals. The local retail is affected. So our economy is very, very interconnected. And we have this tendency to think, oh, it'll affect one industry or another industry, but we're very, very interconnected. And so it really affects all of us. It affects revenues going into government, and those revenues help pay for healthcare and education and social services. So it has very, very big impacts.
Yeah, and I thank you for raising that point because we do tend to think of it, if I'm not directly involved in a certain industry, it isn't going to have much of an impact on me. But it just shows how interconnected the economy truly is and how circular it is in BC, well, in everywhere. I'm curious how the forestry was impacted during Trump's first term of office. What were the sort of ramifications then?
Well, the interesting thing about the Trump presidency, I'm going to talk about tariffs more generally. I
Hmm.
mean, that there
Please.
was a lot of concern around renegotiation, the renegotiation of NAFTA, and what that could mean for Canada. And I think the country did a really good job of defending its interests. It was a full court press. It was a Team Canada. It wasn't just the Prime Minister and the President. It was all the premiers getting engaged with the governors and other elected officials that they knew. It was our civil servants engaging with their civil servants. It was ministers engaging with secretaries. And it was the business community as well, writing op-eds, connecting with their business counterparts. For example, in BC, there are a lot of connections along the Cascadia corridor. And it was leaning into those relationships and explaining to the Americans that, trade is a two-way street. And for 45 out of 50 of the states, Canada is their biggest or second biggest export market. So it's really kind of reminding Americans that they have something to lose as well, and arguing hard for an exemption. And then, of course, our softwood lumber and our forest industry, I mean, they've been hit very hard by this already. They understand the big implications, and we have to do everything we can to protect them from anything that would make what already exists worse, and hopefully to maybe make some positive ground up. But we really do need a full court Team Canada approach
Right.
to Trump, because although this may be a negotiating tactic, we still have to take it seriously.
Right. And I think, a fair point too is it could be a negotiating tactic, but you do need to prepare for the fact that will stay true to his word. And of course, softwood lumber has been impacted by, the pine beetle, by forest fires. It's been depleted by so many factors. I'm just going to bring in a call now that we have from James in Spence's Bridge. Hi, James.
Oh, hello. I would say this is a good time to reform the forestry industry practices in this province, take advantage of the Trump-era tariffs, and protect more areas in BC. There's going to be a lot of jobs, mills shut down because of Trump tariffs. So this is a good time to reform the forestry practices in BC and protect forests that should be protected environmentally. And, for example, in the Earl Lakes region, overcutting has resulted in a loss of a lot of mushroom pickers losing work. And if we bring these areas back, preserve them for the future generations, people will have employment in the forests without cutting the forests down. And this is a window of opportunity, I think.
Okay.
And BC should take advantage of that and protect the landscapes.
All right, James, thank you for that. And I guess, Laura, what sort of investments, maybe are needed to help protect and boost those, logging adjacent industries? As he was saying, it could be an opportunity for some refocus and protection.
Yeah, I mean, I just with respect to what the caller said, I certainly respect his perspective on this, but there's already been a lot of protected area in British Columbia, a lot of old growth set aside. So I think we have to balance that with having an industry. This is an industry that provides high-paying jobs that support families and communities. So I think we need to make sure that we're balancing that perspective. It's a very important sector for British Columbia. And again, not just for the people who work in that sector, but for the revenues that go into government that help pay for the things we all value, including things like, healthcare and social services. So, but again, I think I would zoom out a little bit and say that when we're talking about tariffs, what we're talking about is making Canadian goods more expensive for American customers. And that will reduce their demand for those goods. Right. And that will be problematic for industries right across. And it isn't just, we think about forestry, we think about natural gas as the big exports to the US, but we've got a lot of agricultural products that go down to the US. Think about our blueberries, our hazelnuts, fish. Products, textile products. So there are a whole pile of industries that could potentially be affected by this. In British Columbia, over half, 53% of our exports go to the US. Now in Canada, BC is a little more diversified than the rest of the country. So in Canada, that's about 3/4. And of course, what goes on in the Canadian economy affects British Columbia as well. So I think we've got to be, we've really, again, got to take this very seriously, and it needs a full court press. And it's good to see that's already happening. I know that EB has reached out to congratulate Trump. I know Trudeau has stood up a US-Canada group. So that's already starting to happen, which is and I know the business groups are looking at what they can do. So it's already starting to happen, and I think that's important.
All right. I would love to have more people call in to join our discussion. Perhaps if you are involved in the lumber industry and just how worried or what you think will be the outcome of these so-called Trump tariffs, especially on the lumber industry. 1-800-825-5950. 604-669-3733. You can also email bctoday@cbc.ca. We've had a few emails, in fact. Joseph writes, even with a 10% tariff, when you consider the value of our dollar, Canadian products are still competitive in the United States. And Laura, I see you nodding to that. Is that sort of I suppose in a way, a saving grace that our Canadian dollar is so low still in the U.S.?
Certainly a low Canadian dollar helps our exports, but one thing to remember is that we also buy goods from the Americans, and some of those goods are for final consumption, or things that consumers are buying. So that makes things more expensive for consumers at a time when affordability is top of mind for everyone on both sides of the border. But some of those goods are also what we call intermediate goods, or goods that go into producing goods that then go for export. So I think it's kind of funny, but goods often cross the border much more than once. So if you think about making a car, for example, often that car crosses the border, or the parts for that car cross the border border, like I think it's 9 or 10 times on average. So it's sort of a yes, when the Canadian dollar is weak, that helps our exports. But it comes with a little bit of a caveat that it's not all good news, because if you're importing goods that go into those exports, those are more expensive. And for consumers buying American goods, it's not good news.
We've got a couple more calls to bring aboard. Eric in Lytton. Hi, Eric. How are you feeling about today's discussion?
Well, I hope that Trump realizes how much of their products come over here. And if you're just going to put tariffs on our stuff, maybe we should slap some tariffs on their stuff coming back up here. And one more point about the port strike. I saw on the news in Nanaimo they're loading ships up with raw logs that go overseas to make furniture for us to buy back. I think that those logs should be going to mills in BC.
Mm. All right, Eric. Thank you so much for. Oh, sorry.
Okay, that's all I got to say.
Great. Have a great weekend. Laura, how do you feel about that? You were nodding when he was suggesting that if they're going to tariff us, we're going to tariff them right back.
Yeah, well, I don't want to tariff them right back, because trade wars are really not good for anyone. But where I agree with the caller 100% is that we do need to remind the Americans just how important our market is to their businesses as well. And one of the things that was done really well in 2016 when NAFTA was being renegotiated is the federal government helped put together fact sheets for every single state. So you could go in and give them this one pager showing what their state's biggest exports were to Canada and how important that was to them, as well as the imports, and was really useful for business groups and others who were going, making trips to the US. Mm-hmm. It really was leaning in on all those relationships and just making a little bit more noise. We're not used to doing this as Canadians, but making a little bit more noise, yeah. Right? About how important we are and how important this relationship is. The Canada-US relationship, as one person recently joked, is sort of we're best friends whether we like it or not. And I think it's a relationship that we take for granted sometimes, and we really need to remind the Americans just how important that friendship is right now.
We'll have another call from Linda in Nelson. Hello, Linda.
Hi there. It doesn't really have anything to do with trade. However, I know they're in the middle or finalizing the water treaty, Columbia River Water Treaty, mm-hmm. and Trump promised all of the Americans that they will have as much water, even more, than they could possibly imagine. It will be a water fantasy land. There'll be so much water. They're planning to take it from us, obviously, and I'm not sure if there's been any news on how close to finalizing this, but I think if we have any power at all to deal with anything, because this is not just Americans, this is Trump. He does not listen to anybody. You cannot negotiate with him. He's got his mind straight in his direction, and nobody, not even his fellow Republicans, are going to make him waver. So I think you have to forget about dealing with somebody like that, because you can't deal with them. But I thought it might be interesting before this is finalized that it might be, a little bit in our favor, because that seems to be the only thing we really have right now. And I'm just wondering if the treaty has been signed, or if it's almost signed, or if anybody really knows.
Thank you for that, Linda. Off the top of my head, I don't believe anything has been signed or finalized as of yet. But Laura, what are your thoughts on that? Obviously, yes, as our caller Linda mentioned, Trump can be apparently, it seems, quite strong-willed and singular-minded, but he is also at times overstretching perhaps what the U.S. can do. So when he says, they can have as much water as they've ever imagined, how much of a reality is that something that we need to be concerned about? I mean, are we in danger of sort of him overstepping and exploiting many of our resources?
Well, again, I'm borrowing from someone. I'm not sure who said this first, but sometimes you have to take Trump seriously, but not literally. And I think he often goes into negotiations with a quite aggressive stance, and then what comes out of that negotiation isn't necessarily what he. The initial stance is almost a tactic that's used. Having said that, we have to take that seriously because he's also a bit unpredictable. And as far as the water treaty goes, I don't think that's been finalized. But again, that would be something to take seriously and make sure we're taking a Team Canada approach. And we really have to bring our A game to these negotiations to make sure that Canadian interests are looked after. And it will be helpful if Trump overall sees Canada as an important ally and friend, as opposed to, something else.
Right. We did get a couple of comments. We're actually on TikTok Live. You can find us at CBC Vancouver. One comment said, did the last time the U.S. introduced tariffs cause the Great Depression? Did it affect the economy in a significant way? And another questioning whether if Alberta oil is being tariffed. So lots of discussion, not just about lumber, but about a lot of resources right across the country. Laura, we are just about out of time. Very quickly, 30 seconds or less, I would say. How do you feel about BC's economy under 4 more years of a Trump presidency?
Well, I think we're going to have to make a strong economy a priority for us. I think that ensuring that Canada gets an exemption from these tariffs should be a top priority for both Premier Eby, as well as the Prime Minister, as well as Canadian business leaders and political leaders and civil servants right across Canada.
Laura, thanks so much for taking time with us.
Thank you.
Laura Jones, President and CEO of the Business Council of British Columbia. It is 12:27, and this is BC Today. So yesterday, we talked about whether the promised NDP tax cuts would be the best thing for BC, and you shared some of your thoughts. Cheryl writes, the problem with increasing property taxes is that a lot of property is owned by seniors, and that property increased in value not because they invested, but because they just happened to purchase 40 years ago. House rich and tax poor is a real thing, and the issue is that they can't sell because there's nothing to buy these days to replace the home. Claire writes, I hear so much about tax cuts and the affordability crisis, but what I don't hear much of is how people are dealing with this. For example, people say they can't afford to live in Vancouver. Well, how is this news? Vancouver was unaffordable back in the 1980s. I can't even afford to visit Vancouver. I lived and worked in what some would describe as more remote areas like Salt Spring. I worked at a job, and before I retired, I purchased the property that I could afford, and it wasn't Salt Spring. I had a house built that I designed with the help of a draftsperson and built by a local builder to lock up in just 11 weeks. We planted a garden and fruit, and at age 70, I still work part-time and volunteer, as does my 83-year-old husband, thus bringing in an extra $2,000 a month, which seems like a small fortune when added to our pension. And Steve says the discussion of increasing the burden to BC residents by adding more taxes really makes my blood boil. No more taxes, no more liberal ideology. BC residents and fellow Canadians are taxed to the max. And thank you all for your thoughts. This is BC Today. I'm Amy Bell filling in for Michelle Elliott. We're on Radio 1, CBC Television, and live streaming on our website, cbc.ca/BC, YouTube at CBC Vancouver and on the CBC News app, and on TikTok Live today. Just search for CBC BC. The CBC News with Robert Zimmerman is up next.
Good afternoon. Judicial recounts in BC's provincial election should wrap up today, confirming whether Premier David Eby's New Democrats hang on to their one-seat majority almost 3 weeks after voters went to the polls. Andrew Watson with Elections BC says the recounts are on track to conclude. though certification won't happen until next week following an appeal period. Talks to end the labor dispute at BC ports are set to resume tomorrow. Ottawa is sending federal mediators to join negotiations. About 700 workers remain locked out by their employers in a move that has halted cargo operations along the coast. And people in Kootenay Bay came together this morning to protest job action on the Kootenay Lake Ferry. The ferry has been reduced to essential services and emergencies only since last Sunday. That means only students, healthcare workers, or those with medical appointments can cross. And now the BC forecast on the north coast. A mix of sun and cloud this afternoon with a high of 9. Highs to 10 degrees with a chance of showers and strong winds in the Peace. In the central interior, including Prince George, showers with a high of 5. Highs around 7 degrees with a mix of sun and cloud in the Kootenays. In the southern interior, including Kelowna, mainly cloudy with a high of 8. And a chance of showers this afternoon in Greater Victoria and the Fraser Valley. Rain late this afternoon in Metro Vancouver, with highs around 13. That's your CBC News update from Vancouver.
Thank you very much, Robert. And we have a lot more on today's top stories on the afternoon shows in your region here in Metro Vancouver. Here's what's coming up on the coast.
Hi, Amy. Belle Puri here. Jody Martinson will actually be in the On the Coast chair this afternoon. She'll talk to a local fashion designer who recently attended a Sabrina Carpenter show in Vancouver. And during the concert, she got the singer's attention with a specially designed cowboy hat. And the singer ended up wearing it during the show. As well, Jody will talk about COP29, the United Nations Climate Change Conference, and today is Indigenous Veterans Day. So CBC reporter Wamish Hamilton will join On the Coast with a story about a chief from Seashot First Nation in Port Alberni. He fought in the Second World War and was killed in France. Wamish will tell us how his family is now connecting with his story. That and so much more coming up On the Coast today with Jody Martinson, starting at 3.
Belle, thank you. You can hear On the Coast on CBC Radio 1 in Metro Vancouver and anywhere on the CBC News app. BC Today's gardening columnist Brian Minter is here to take your questions about all things gardening. And again, you can call us at 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, or hit pound 690 on your cell. You can email bctoday@cbc.ca. And we're live on TikTok today. You can find us, CBC Vancouver, and leave a comment or question for Brian there. Brian, what's on your mind today now that the, I guess, spooky season is behind us? What's next?
Oh, okay. Speaking of spooky season, we're almost doing the same thing with Christmas right now.
Yeah.
We traditionally wait until Remembrance Day is over, then we begin the Christmas season. But, Amy, you and I both know that plastic is everywhere, giant plastic snowmen and Santa Claus and every other thing you can imagine. And then the inflatables. Oh, my goodness, they're everywhere. And, these are not the most environmentally friendly things we can have. So let's get nature involved in this whole Christmas process, and I absolutely love it. This morning, when we found I was in District 1881. It's a new wonderful development downtown Chilliwack, and what they wanted was big planters full of Christmas greens. And as we're making them up, the fragrance of the greens, the look of the greens, a lot of the shop owners came out and said, "Oh, this is so nice. I just love this." And let's maybe think a little bit more about going back to some of the old traditions traditions of bringing fresh greens on our decks and on our patios and around the front of our home on the front porch. And you know what? It's become a big thing, Amy, right across British Columbia and right across the country. Matter of fact, you know, I always chuckle to myself when I'm watching the CBC News in Toronto or whatever. You'll see all the beautiful planters in the downtown areas full of Christmas greens, and it's nice. So it's beginning because people are looking to kind of change the season right now.
Yeah.
So what do we use? First of all, porch pots are the big thing, and those are the same containers you had in the spring and summer on your deck, full of annuals. Well, they're full of dead plants now, basically, but they've got a lot of soil in them, and you want that wet, heavy soil because into those pots, we love to put Western red cedar. We love to put some of the beautiful pines, both the weeping white pine that smells so good, and the lodgepole pine, and the true firs, the noble firs, and so many other varieties of noble fir. And so you make this beautiful array, just like you're making an arrangement inside your home, but it's outside. They take the coldest of the winters, and you just put them into the containers. That's simply what you do. And so they're secure because we're going to get wind and so on. So secure them. So extra long branches that go in. And then people love to use, especially up north, you've got lots of wild birch everywhere, stems. You're not taking out the tree, just some stems or branches. And if you live anywhere else and you got a birch tree, let's rob a few stems because that lovely white contrasted with the greens is amazing. And then what the big thing is right around the world right now is the hardy deciduous holly. This is not the traditional holly with the evergreen leaves and so on. These are the called Ilex versiliata, and hardy to -40. I mean, they're incredible plants. Wow. But what they also have is these vibrant red or orange, and you should see when I was in Europe in January, the new colors coming out. Oh my gosh, they're incredible. But they last all season, and the caveat here too, birds love them. So if the birds are starving and they need a little berries, put them out in your patio.
There you go,
can
little
enjoy
snack,
them.
little decoration.
Absolutely. So you can pick up some cones anywhere right now, and you know, to make them a little more attractive, take a paint tray that you would normally use a roller brush and put a little bit of white latex paint there, rub the cones in that. It gives you that frosted effect. And when you start putting this together, Amy, they look absolutely amazing. And people have little bits of driftwood and so on. And the other thing is, if you can get some mini lights, LEDs, of course, to save electricity, at nighttime as we get dark earlier, just plug it in. So this whole container comes alive. So that's the porch pot. Hanging baskets, the same thing. The old moss hanging baskets are ideal. You know, so take out the dead flowers and again, leave the moss and the soil there. It doesn't have to be pretty. And you just go completely around. I love Western red cedar because they get that soft look, and some of the weeping white pine with the lovely fragrance that goes around. And the same thing, put some of the berries in. I love huckleberry twigs in there, which are kind of great. Some of contorted willow looks great in there as well. And then get a few cones and sort of hang them over the basket. And people, it's just as beautiful as your summer basket. They're amazing. And then garland around your home, swags, and so on. So turn your patio. And again, all we're doing is pruning the trees and getting some of the prunings and making them beautiful, so environmentally friendly. You've already got the soil in place. And essentially, the fragrance when you walk out into your patio, garlands you can make, and swags, and so many other things. It changes the nature of your small deck or big deck or large patio, small patio, into something that's warm and refreshing. And again, with some of the berries, it's bird friendly as well. So it's just a nice thing to do. It's something that's caught on. And but you know, if you go to some of the wonderful garden stores and florists who make these up, you get some ideas in terms of how you can make them better, improve them. It's just a lot of fun. It's creative, and to me, it's a really big thing. And you know, the darn things last. Oh my gosh, well into January, February.
There
So
you
this
go.
isn't just a few week thing. And but keep them wet. If we get a dry, sunny weather like we've been having, spritz them with water to keep them good and moist. And that's all you have to do. So inexpensive, fun to do, creative, changes the tone in the neighborhood, and to me, wildlife friendly as well.
I think that's lovely. And you don't get that great smell from a plastic inflatable in your front yard that you do from a nice cedar bough.
Okay.
Thank you
Good.
for that. You've
So-
inspired me once again, Brian. And of course, we
Thank
want
you.
people to call in with your questions for Brian. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. Email bctoday@cbc.ca. No surprise, people are lining up to chat with you, Brian. So we'll go to Cam in Cobble Hill. Hi, Cam. What's your question for Brian?
Yeah, hello, yes. Yeah, I've got a lineup of skyrocket junipers, and they've all done well except for two of them look like they're dying, but they're not dead completely. And I sprayed them with copper sulfate, I think it is. and I was wondering what
Smart.
could be wrong with them.
Yeah, Cam, the spray is smart. Junipers do get a bit of dieback disease, but generally not the uprights like skyrocket. The three things I would do. I would go around the soil right now, make sure it's well drained in that area. Junipers hate wet feet. So fine bark mulch worked into the soil to make sure it's better drained. That's my only suspicion in terms of what's a problem. You did spray them with copper for any dieback disease. So a little pruning of the dead wood out there. And then in spring, get them some time-release fertilizer to see if at all you can get that blue coming back in there.
Yeah. So is it can you spray them too often with copper sulfate?
I would say during rainy periods, that's the problem, is that they don't like the wet, continuous, insidious kind of wet on them. So I would say at this point here, once every 2 or 3 weeks would be adequate, Cam. That's what I would do.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Cam, thanks so much
Good
for
luck.
calling in. Yes, good luck. Sheena in Victoria, what is your question for Brian?
Hello. Hi, Brian. I have a balcony, and I would like to have a little. And Amy, I might have a follow-up question, so please don't just cut me off. Yeah.
No promises.
Well, please try. So I want to grow a little miniature lemon or lime because it's so much affordable than buying them.
Yeah.
And is there one? I live in Victoria. Is there one I can buy? It's going to have to stay in a pot, and will I need to bring it in over the winter?
Yeah, Sheena, I'm glad you asked that question. It is so very important. Don't even think about it. They will take close to frost once they're established. And we had a number freeze lightly in a cold greenhouse last year when it got so cold. They were all fine. They came through it. But essentially, the ideal temperature is 10 to 15 degrees for them over the wintertime. But outside, it's just too cold for them to thrive and do well. I mean, in Florida, they get the occasional frost that moves down from a northern cold spell, and they survive. But they have helicopters out there, getting the frost off the branches with the breeze and so on. But no, you have to have a spot inside when we do get that inclement weather. And it's just too much of a dramatic change is the other thing, Sheena. They should be inside now beside a cool window and being misted, and that's the thing. But to leave them out all winter, even in Victoria, I'm sorry, I'm afraid of saying yes to that one.
Okay, but my real question, so you're saying that I can do it as long as I bring them in. What would be a good variety for me to buy in Victoria to keep on my balcony and then bring in the
You're talking lemons here for most part?
Lemons or limes. It's for my gym time.
Yeah, of course. Key lime, you can get the key lime, which is actually one of the better ones. And the Meyer lemon, unequivocally, people love the Meyer lemon. And Sheena, I've had so many people come in who have them in their garden, producing fruit and doing very, very well. But get the ones that are more compact. The ones you do buy, they all come in from Florida for the most part, but they're ready to produce fruit and flowers, even as a small plant. So rather than the seedling, go with those ones. And again, be ready when it gets just too chilly to bring them inside, Sheena. Okay.
Oh, thank you for that, Sheena. And David writes, last June, I saved a huge, beautiful rosemary bush from the wrecking ball. I put it in a huge, well-drained pot, watered it, and within days it began to fail, witherless leaves. Today, about a third of the bush is light green. The rest of the bush is gray and dried out. What should I do?
Well, David, the thing is, they don't transplant too well, especially if they're beat up and so on. It takes a while for them to get established. So very, very well drained soil for all rosemary. That's incredibly important. At this point, I would prune it back fairly hard. If you have a place, the ARP is the hardiest of the rosemary varieties. But even then, depending where we live, I think they should be inside in the coolest location you possibly can inside your home. And just keep it barely moist. That's really the secret. If you live in a milder area, Again, out in the deck right now where it's sheltered, we're having an amazing fall right now with not much frost, but just be prepared to bring it in. But again, they like to be root bound in a small container in very well drained soil and kept just moist. That's the secret for rosemary.
All right, hope that helps. And of course, still time to get your questions in for Brian Minter about gardening. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. We do have a question in now from Adam in Burnaby. Hi, Adam.
Oh, hi, Brian. Yeah.
Hi.
And Amy. Thanks for taking
Hi.
my call. I just had a question. We have these I think they're called Eastern redbuds.
Yes.
In our condo complex, and the recent storms took down some really large limbs. And I guess the leaves are still on the limbs, but the landscapers just sort of tied them back up to the tree. Is there any hope in those trees surviving with those big limbs just being tied back up, or is it better to just have them taken off? And any tips on just making sure that the trees can survive?
Yeah, Adam, with all the windstorms we've been getting lately and the damage to so many trees, that's a very, very important question. No, don't tie them up. If that was just a temporary measure to try and deal with them, it's a beginning of a huger, much more large problem. Those branches, once they've been cut or damaged and whatever, they're going to be the weakest part of the tree. So any disturbance we have in terms of heavy wind, it's going to be an issue. So they should be taken off. And the leaves, the surface right now, depending, we haven't had much of a frost situation, so that's why they're still hanging on there. But they're dormant enough now that the only thing is if enough leaves are off, we can actually see and get an idea where you want to do some pruning to keep the tree even, because you may take branches off one side that are damaged. You might have to go to the other side to balance out the tree and take those off as well. So you need good visibility on those branches. But to answer your question, Cercis will tolerate basically a hard pruning with no problem at all. It's a great time to do it as soon as more leaves are off and you can visually see where you're going. No, prune hard, and the tree will respond beautifully. But the harder you prune to get the stronger central stem, you're going to have a far better tree in the future.
All right, hope that helps, Adam. Linda in Nelson, you've got a question for Brian. Hi, Linda, are you there?
Yes, hi. Thank you for taking my call. I had a question, Brian, about a southern magnolia I purchased years ago, and it's had some struggles. It had to be moved because they put water lines in my front yard, but it survived. That was a couple of years ago, but it kind of started to die a little bit after, and we've pruned it back, so it's only, instead of 7 feet tall, it's only about 3.5, 4, but it's got kind of a rust on the leaves. I do not have, or did not have, one whole leaf that wasn't affected by it. They're kind of a waxy, thicker leaf, kind of like a gardenia, but I'm not sure what I've got on it, if it's a blight, a disease, or lack of nutrients. How do I protect it this winter, and what can I do for it next spring? It seems to be okay in the spring, and then it starts looking terrible. It still flowers, but not much.
Yeah, Linda, again, a very important question. Magnolia grandiflora is what you have, and I think Edith Bogue is the hardiest of the varieties because they vary in terms of hardiness. So you'll want to make sure the one the toughest that'll tolerate. You should be in Nelson around zone 5. But the situation is, I think every winter, last winter was so severe. What I would do is when we get that severe cold, and only when we get that severe cold, I would put a tripod of stakes around it and wrap it with a product called Ensolite. It's what the nursery industry uses. It's a white material, but it has the 10 degrees Celsius rating in terms of diffusing the wind, but also keeping it warmer. So only when we get cold, I would wrap it very tightly with the Ensolite to get it through that difficult time. In terms of and I would do that until it's unmanageable to be able to do as it grows. But I would give it maybe look at the soil in the spring, put something like sea soil around it, or even in the fall and winter because the roots are still alive. But when you get a dark on the leaf, many varieties have a rusty type of underside. That's the nature of what a lot of southern magnolias are like. So I wouldn't worry too much about it. I think it's more of a physiological issue than a disease issue, because I see that a lot in Magnolia grandifloras. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. But just get it through the winter right now, and do wrap it with insulate if you possibly can, if we do get that cold spell. And then the spring, we always say put the tine release fertilizer on. It's got a pretty good root system, even though it's died back. It should take off for you with no problems next spring. And don't worry too much about the underside. When the new leaves come out, Linda, I think it's going to be fine.
All right, Linda, hope that helps. We've got a question now from Jim on Hornby Island. Hi, Jim. What's your question for Brian?
Hi, Brian. Will my kiwis ever be ripe, or should I just pick them now and wait?
Oh, okay. Now you're talking about the big fuzzy kiwis or the smaller grape-sized ones?
These are big fuzzy ones, and
okay.
This year they're getting a little bit bigger. Some may be elongated, but most of them are
good
ovoid.
Yeah. Well, very much like persimmons, I'm going to say, Jim, November 15th. Is about when I would harvest them. We do the Eastern Valley. That's when we pick them. We used to have them in our nursery, and I used to enjoy them every year, but they're hard as a rock. Putting them in a bag with a plastic bag with some apples in there. The ethylene the apples give off will help ripen the fruit. It's amazing how quickly they ripen. But it's amazing, too, once you do pick them, put them in a windowsill if you don't want to do the bag thing with the apples. And it doesn't take them long to ripen. They ripen actually pretty quickly. I remember we left them on a little bit later, and I was just eating right off the tree when it got into late November, December. But anyway, Jim, November 15th, no matter how big they are, they're ready to harvest. And again, plastic bag with apples inside to give off the ethylene. It amazingly ripens up with just in about 10 days or so.
I do the same thing with avocados with bananas.
There you go.
Yeah,
the avocado
wonderful.
trade.
Yeah, that's great, Jim.
All right.
Anyway, good luck.
Thank you very much.
Enjoy your
Take care.
kiwis. We have got a couple of emails to get to right now, Brian. So let us see what we've got. Doug writes, how long can you keep carrots and beets in the ground?
Well, until I'm not sure where we're phoning from here, but all winter long, as long as the soil isn't too wet, that's, and of course the rain is a factor there, but basically all winter long. And if we're going to get from CBC News getting a cold spell coming along, that's the end. You better either mulch them heavily with bark mulch or sawdust, or lift them at that point. But generally, most of our in the lower mainland and areas, you can get them through all winter, which is lovely to be able to go and harvest them all winter long. Yeah.
All right. Hope that helps you out, Doug. And Pete writes, the entire community gardens in Richmond suffered tomato blight this year. Yep. Is it safe to plant tomatoes again next year? And what precautions should I use on my plot?
Okay, very, very good question. As long as all the vines, and they're done now, pretty much, no vines left, get everything out. Basically, I wouldn't even compost them. Just get the vines out of the area. And honestly, it's waterborne, it's airborne in terms of that blight. The early blight hits July 15th as a reminder, which is not a problem. It's a late blight that hits August 15th is where we have to either keep when we get rain and they have high humidity at that time, which is always a problem, cover the foliage. You don't have to surround them, but just put some sort of canopy over to keep the water off the foliage. The other thing is we still in British Columbia have copper spray, which we use to prevent blight on tomatoes and potatoes. They're similar. So essentially every 10 days as of August, if you're really having trouble, a preventative spray once every 10 days with copper, keeping the foliage dry, you should be absolutely fine. And also I'm reminding everybody, let's not just have later tomatoes. Let's get early, mid-season, and late tomatoes. So you can harvest by July. You should be eating a lot of your earlier varieties of tomatoes. And so think of the varieties as well. And also there are blight-resistant varieties out there, which is something to keep in mind.
All right. We have time for one final call. Steve in Campbell River, what's your question for Brian? And we do just have a couple minutes left.
Yep.
Oh, hi. Yeah, I've got lawn grubs, I think, in my lawn. Piles of dirt I can see during the day. At night when you go out, you can see them crawling everywhere. I've got a dog, so what can I put on there to get them without hurting my dog?
Yeah, no, they're a very good point, and thank you. And Steve, just so you know, we've gone over this many times. BTK. Bacillus thuringiensis is basically, you can find it in garden stores right now. There is a product called Scott's Grub Out, not that we recommend products here, but the Grub Out has BTK in it. It's available at most garden stores and no problem. If you can't find it, then just simply BTK in the ground. Now, we talked about this a lot in the program earlier this summer. We said by, late August, mid-August, and early September, let's try and get it on. But it's a bacteria that's still alive. A lot of the eggs are still in the ground for other grubs and so on. But let's just, in a watering can, in the areas where you're having problem, do a soil drench with BTK, and that's probably the most effective thing. We've seen pretty good results with that, Steve. So please give it a try and let us know how you make out.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you so
Good,
much.
thank you.
And I'm always, it's something to always keep in mind, Brian, too, that, you do have to factor in that your pets will be walking where you're potentially putting down any of these treatments. So you do have to make sure there's nothing that could, potentially harm them.
That's right. And that's why we're recommending BTK. And Steve brought up a very good point about that. So, Amy, thanks for reinforcing that. But perfectly safe. We can drink the darn stuff. But essentially, it is a tough one on grubs. And it's organic, too, which I think we all appreciate.
All right. I don't think I'm going to bottoms up anytime soon and take a swig. But nice to know that we can still do that.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Brian, as always, such a treat to talk to you. And I have no doubt when we see you in a couple of weeks, we'll have even more calls and emails at your ready. So I hope you enjoy your weekend.
Okay, you too, Amy. And Remembrance Day is so important for Canadians, and we all really go to the cenotaphs and our communities. And to me, that's such an important thing that Canadians do.
Yeah, it really is. And even though it's going to be raining, everybody hopefully can get out there and pay respects. Thank you, Brian, for that reminder.
Good. Thanks, Amy.
And of course, Brian Minter is our BC Today gardening columnist. And tune in on Monday. We will have a special Remembrance Day episode of BC Today with guest host Jody Martinson. And in fact, we will have special programming throughout the day, starting with the early ed and lasting right through on the coast. So do keep that in mind. You can find that on CBC Radio 1, on the CBC Listen app, and always on the CBC Vancouver YouTube page. As for the weekend's forecast, yes, in fact, we are getting a lot of rain heading our way, starting perhaps very soon in many areas, and it will continue on and off throughout the weekend. That is our show for today. You can always keep up with the discussion by emailing us at bctoday.ca. Thank you for listening and for watching.